Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here. On behalf of my colleague and friend, Sarah Sless, hello and welcome to this, our last day of ProCon 2021. We are so glad that you have chosen to join us today. At our training with our partners at the National Center on Health, Physical Activity, and Disability, we have learned important ways to communicate so all people can feel comfortable. My name is Mark Horowitz, and I am Vice President of Program and Talent at JCC Association. My pronouns are he, him, and I am wearing a blue shirt and have only a little bit of gray hair left on my head. I'm joining you from Buffalo, New York, acknowledging the traditional territory of 6 Native nations, the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora indigenous peoples. I'm honored to be here with you today. At JCC Association, in all settings, even virtual, we want you to feel at home here and very much a part of the community, to join and participate, to add your thoughts and to bring your strength to our community. We look forward at this professional conference to being a launch point to an ongoing learning community for all of the different peer communities and electives that you have been with this week. At JCC Association, we too are on a journey to a more inclusive practice. We are not the experts, but we do understand the important work and commit to working internally and partnering with you as we move forward. I'm now going to put into the chat our inclusion statement. We ask that you let us know how we can help you truly feel a sense of belonging here. We aspire for every person. Excuse me 1 second, I just lost my entire script. That is a very bad thing because I have no idea what it says. Give me 2 seconds here. Sorry, I'm going to go to the paper. We aspire for every person to feel that they belong at ProCon 21 and are working to build inclusive spaces. We hope you feel welcome, respected, safe, and fully included. To that end, we encourage you to consider the following suggestions as we begin our time together. We invite you to rename yourself with your name, agency, and if you so choose, adding your preferred pronouns. You will be meeting each other in smaller groups, perhaps if we have breakouts for discussion, and that will help us support that. This session is being recorded. We understand that not everyone would like to be recorded, in which case you may turn off your camera. However, we encourage everyone who is comfortable to please stay visible. We are a small enough group that we'd love to see you and feel as if we are all together in the room. We have closed captioning available to you at the bottom of your screen. If you'd rather remove it, please click to remove using the button on the bottom toolbar. We're thrilled to offer this conference at no cost to our JCCs, which is made possible by our very generous Professional Conference 2021 sponsors. Each sponsor believes in the JCC movement and the incredible work JCCs accomplish day in and day out. Their representatives are here with us, and we hope that you will join in showing appreciation for their support by visiting their virtual booths in our virtual vendor hall immediately after this session. I apologize for this long introduction, and without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today. Reverend Liddy Barlow is the first woman to be installed as Executive Minister of Christian Associates of Southwest Pennsylvania, an organization that brings together diverse Christians in Greater Pittsburgh for the common good. Rabbi Ron Simons is the founding director of the Center for Loving Kindness and Civic Engagement at the Jewish Community Center of Greater Pittsburgh, where he serves as Senior Director of Jewish Life. It is my honor and privilege to introduce you to Reverend Barlow and Rabbi Simons.
Well, thanks, Mark. We appreciate all the administrative pieces and all of the nice tidings. Thank you so much. Liddy, here we are at the JCC Association Conference. Can you believe it?
I could not be more excited to be here. This is really great, and welcome to everyone. So glad that you all have joined us.
So I want everyone to know that Liddy is a dear friend of mine and a great colleague. Liddy is a minister in the United Church of Christ. The work that she does is in, as she likes to describe it, in wrangling Christians of all different sorts all across Southwest Pennsylvania about 2,000 churches are represented in her organization. And we've been doing good work together for many, many years now.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ron is busy doing visionary work at the JCC of Greater Pittsburgh, in particular through the Center for Loving Kindness, where he and I make all kinds of trouble. The center is dedicated to amplifying the long-held values of love your neighbor as yourself and do not stand idle while your neighbor bleeds, while redefining neighbor from a geographic term to a moral concept.
You did that really well, Liddy. That was great.
Thanks. I've been working on it.
I know you have been. I know. All right. So here's what we'd like to do with you today is obviously a little bit of welcoming. Then we want to tell you, what is this thing called Sofa Spirituality that you signed up for the next hour? We will give you a sample of it. We're going to use a video about being in the belly of the fish and how it isn't so bad to be there. Don't worry. It's all going to become clear. You're already thinking Jonah, I know. Then we'll talk about what are the possibilities for your JCC, and we'll open it up for questions and conversations. We're really glad that you're here.
Sure. And so we invite you sort of during this early part of our presentation, if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. We can see them there. But we will have time towards the end for actual face-to-face unmuted conversations. So, so feel free to hold your questions till then as well, if you would prefer. So Sofa Spirituality is a project of the JCC of Greater Pittsburgh's Center for Loving Kindness in partnership with Christian Associates of Southwest Pennsylvania that began during the early weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what we quickly discovered was that although this project was immediately inspired by the strange conditions brought on by the pandemic, it actually responds to an issue that has been part of our communities for many, many years previously, and that is the problem of spiritual isolation. People are feeling isolated from one another, from their neighbors of different traditions, and even from their conceptions of the divine. As a Christian humanist working with churches across a wide region, I find that I hear often from Christians in small congregations out in the middle of nowhere who say, we would like to be connected with our interfaith neighbors, but we don't have any interfaith neighbors geographically. We also know the struggles of loneliness, a pandemic that has been lasting for decades, loneliness among our elders, loneliness among young families, people who have less of an ability to get out and participate in in-person programming, who have actually found some joy during the pandemic in the new world of virtual programming. The SOFA project takes the interfaith work that Ron and I have been doing over the last several years into a new place for a digital era. All of us have participated in the past in old school interfaith programs, maybe an interfaith panel discussion with a group of experts at the front of the room, maybe a potluck in a church basement someplace. What we want to do is to reimagine what interfaith conversations can look like for this particular moment in history in response to healing the isolation that people are experiencing. So we want to foster communication across our real differences and our perceived differences, in reinvigorating dialogue among spiritual leaders and amongst lay people in a way that helps to respond to a changed landscape of organized religion. Using applied spirituality without the formality of our traditional religious practices.
So while our model is really flexible, and you'll see that as we keep on going and how it can work in your JCC, essentially, it has three components to it. One is you watch a short video, about 6 or 7 minutes, of one spiritual leader talking about one aspect of spirituality. Actually, Lydia and I are very careful about how we curate those. They're always an interview. So she or I are the ones who do the interview, and then someone else is being interviewed. I never interview a Jew. Liddy rarely interviews a Christian, although there's much more diversity in that. And then we split up all the other faith leaders so that there isn't in-talk. There isn't Jewish in-talk or Christian in-talk in it. It really comes from a place of curiosity. So people watch that video. We post them online. We work on partnerships and share them across organizations. We then bring people into a Zoom room and we engage in a dialogue about the video. But it's not a religions 101 class. It's something much more, and we'll see that in just a moment. But the key to it is that we discover our shared humanity. We discover our shared values. We realize that even as we celebrate our differences, we know that we're connected to one another.
The metaphor that we like to use in this process is that of a window and a mirror. We hope that these sofa spirituality experiences offer a window into faith traditions other than our own, so that through sofa spirituality, we are learning more about Buddhism or Catholicism or conservative Judaism. We get a little taste of what those traditions mean to the people who practice them.
By the way, Liddy, because we're at the JCCA, and because we know that early childhood is the best department in every JCC, that I need to acknowledge to Katie Plopker, who's sitting across the courtyard from me, that I learned that language from her and her colleagues in ECDC, and now we're applying it to interfaith work.
Katie, we are taking this metaphor and running with it, so thank you. So the window is only the first part. The other part is the mirror, that sofa spirituality is also a mirror so that we can better understand our own faith practices. We aren't engaging in these conversations so that anyone will become a Buddhist or become a conservative Jew or become a Roman Catholic. We instead understand our own traditions, those that we practice or those that we perhaps grew up in or are connected to better through connections with others. So both a window and a mirror.
And for our purposes, we imagine, and we'll have lots of time to talk about this, and this is a little bit of a tease for you, but we imagine that we can use sofa spirituality in our JCCs for both professional development and for community programs. And again, it's about having that applied spirituality without religious formality. It's very adaptable.
So we wanted to take you on a little tour of our website, which you can find at sofaspirituality.org, so that you can get a sense both of how this is set up and how it works, but also some of the breadth of the conversations that we have had. So at sofaspirituality.org, as you scroll down the page past our intro video and a little bit of information, you will discover our video library of the interviews that we have recorded and posted so far. Our website currently features like 45, 50 different interviews with spiritual leaders. Some of them are our local friends here in Pittsburgh. Others have national pulpits. You see a Sikh leader and activist, Valerie Kaur, there in the middle. Others are friends and neighbors from across the our own connections. Rabbi Andrea Weiss from Hebrew Union College, Bishop Gene Robinson from the Chautauqua Institution, the former Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire. We really have made an effort to include a breadth of spiritual traditions and engaging voices from all different corners of the world of faith. When people encounter these on their website, they can then click through to one that might interest them. Ron, you want to click through?
Yeah, sure.
Super. So, and that brings you to a page where you can obviously view the video, but where you can also sign up to participate in dialogue around that video. During our seasons, our next season begins the week of May 10th. We have scheduled dialogues each week for the general public to sign up for and participate in. And then, of course, we're also open to scheduling particular opportunities with our community partners.
And I think that for our purposes, you should be thinking about customization. How is it that we can do this in partnership with you? Let me also be clear, at no cost to you for your JCC, whether professional development or community engagement. Lydia, you going to share your screen again?
I sure am. So the best way to get to know sofa spirituality is actually to experience it. So we wanted to bring you along with us into a sample sofa spirituality session.
So the way that it always begins is once we've gathered together in the Zoom room, and by the way, these Zoom rooms can be rooms like ours, 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, as long as we're able to do breakout rooms so they get smaller. by the way, Mark, I think we'll stick just to one room. We won't do a breakout room later on, just given how many we are here. But we always begin by establishing a covenant of expectations. And that is that we ask people to be kind. We ask them to listen with curiosity, to engage without judgment, to speak with honesty, and to share the floor. And what we have found is that by putting these expectations on the table at the very beginning, we get really good conversations. We get really deep and respectful behavior, and it just helps everyone understand why it is that we're here. Again, just playing back on that early childhood metaphor, it's everything I learned in kindergarten, right? And it works for adults as well. And so then once we've done that, we then invite people to introduce themselves. Now, we're a little bit big for doing this all together in voice. So we want to invite you to go to the chat now, right? And once you open up the chat, if you could say, yes, I agree to that covenant, tell us who you are, tell us your pronouns, tell us the spiritual influences on your life, very briefly. It could just be one word, or it could be a little bit more than that. Tell us where you are and what are your circumstances. We're not quite sure what that means, but it really pulls out a lot of stuff from people. And you see that Liddy has already modeled that in the chat. So we invite you to do the same. We'll just give like a 30-second pause so that people have a little time to make that happen.
Sometimes I describe that circumstances question together with the geography question, right? It's where are you? Both where are you physically, and then where are you in your life? How do you spend your time? Hi, Lori. Hi, Sophia. I'm glad you guys are here. Welcome to Mark and Sarah and Rhonda, Catherine. This is great. We've got folks all over the place geographically and maybe not so much religiously, but a little bit religiously.
A little bit religiously, yeah.
It's exciting. Welcome, Brad. Hi, Renee.
So Liddy, if you would stop the share.
I sure can.
We're ready to get going. Now, the video that we picked for our purposes today, let me get to, hang on, I'm not exactly where I need to be. Hang on one second. Gotta go back into my web browser and get to the screen.
I just want to give a special shout out to Renee, who's in Tucson. We've actually been doing Sofa Spirituality in partnership with the Arizona Faith Network over the last couple weeks. So that's an interesting Arizona connection.
Okay. So here we are. So what we wanted to share with you today is a video that comes from one of our local neighbors, Reverend Darnell Drury, who works on helping victims make their way through trauma. Darnell has been a great partner of Liddy's and mine in our community interfaith work with spiritual leaders, interfaith spiritual leaders, but he also has been a great friend of the JCC. This summer, he came in and did anti-racism training, diversity training for our early childhood department. And so we picked him because the issue that he's raising in this video, the belly of the fish isn't so bad, is really something that's relevant for us, but also he's a part of our JCC community. He's not just someone that we interviewed. So let's sit back. The way that we like to describe this moment is imagine that you're at a dinner party and you're at the hors d'oeuvre time of it, and you're around, hanging around with people, having your hors d'oeuvre, having your chablis, and a bunch of you grab a corner on a sofa, on a sectional. You have your chablis in hand and you're starting a conversation talking about something important. We'd like you to be in that space as well. But instead of us talking over the video, we invite you to use the chat as well. Almost like you're sitting on that couch and you're saying, oh, that was really interesting. Or I didn't understand that. Or it reminds me of something else. So we invite you to chat away if that's comfortable for you, as Darnell teaches us something about being in the belly of the fish. Welcome to Soul for Spirituality. I'm Rabbi Ron Simons of the Center for Loving Kindness of the JCC of Greater Pittsburgh, and we bring you Soul for Spirituality in partnership with our friends and neighbors from Christian Associates of Southwest Pennsylvania. And today we are going to be inspired spiritually by the conversation we're about to have with Reverend Darnell Drury, a good and deep friend of mine. Darnell is here in Pittsburgh representing the Center for Victims and the Shine Awards Foundation. Darnell, it's always joyous for me to be in your presence.
It is a blessing to be in your presence this say. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Darnell. Darnell, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, today what I want to talk to the audience about is recognizing when gifts are come when it's a gift, or if it's a struggle or trauma, And so I identified in the book of Jonah, talk about the book of Jonah. It's an Old Testament book. It's a story of Jonah that people know very well. Jonah and a lot of times you hear Jonah in the well, but in the Bible it says Jonah in the great.
It's a big fish. It's not a whale.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a big fish, not a whale, but it's a big fish. And so you hear that story a lot of times. So, and I think there's some things that I've learned in my new revelation of studying it, is that there's some things that are translated. I think maybe the interpretations have been brought forward in a very different way, and from a much more traumatic way. And in fact, it should be looked at that this big fish that we talk about that Jonah was swallowed up by, it should not be looked at it from a traumatic perspective. It should be looked at as a gift, as a gift to Jonah. And so here this big fish swallows up Jonah, and Jonah recognized this big fish was more of a gift to him, because the real trauma was that he was at the bottom of the sea dying. After he got off the path, God had presented him to a path, the way that he wanted him to go.
So you're saying that sometimes in life, when we read a scripture or we look at a situation, we say, "Oh my God, that is such a bad situation," but it actually might be a step better than what was for the person at the center of it. And the fish, and being in the belly of the fish, is better than being on the bottom of the ocean.
Oh, that's exactly it, to the point. And a lot of times we looked at the belly of the fish as growing up as traditionally we looked at this belly of the fish. Well, a lot of times humans, we look at things through a trauma lens. And because we look at things through a trauma lens, we automatically point to the survival state, fight, flight, or freeze. So we looked at this belly of the fish as a traumatic situation, when in fact it was the situation of the gift. The traumatic situation was the bottom of the ocean, but the great fish picked him up from the bottom of the ocean. He says in the scriptures, if you read, he said, "I was being choked out by the seaweed of the ocean, and I was at the foot of the mountain." So he was describing being at the bottom of the ocean, but then swept up by a great fish. That great fish later, spewed him out back up on the earth, which means it was the vehicle to get him back to land, back to safety.
So Darnell, I don't know if you know this, but every year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the holy day of the Jewish year, the prophetic passage that we read in the afternoon is the entire book of Jonah.
Wow, that's a blessing.
So when we're standing before God, hoping that we are in our whites, right? Hoping that we are going to get redemption and salvation and be inscribed in the book of life, we read Jonah.
Wow.
Right? And hear that story of being from the very bottom, vehicle of redemption.
And that's what it is. So for traditions, at least in my lifetime, traditionally it was always the great fish was the dramatic, and it was the very scary situation. In fact, it was the vehicle to salvation, reconciliation to God. So that was a blessing. That's a blessing.
Darnell, can you give us a modern day application of this in some of the work that you do?
I think what is interesting enough, I was studying this particular passage in this time of pandemic, and I was hearing a lot of pastors, connect this time of pandemic to this Jonah story. And so a lot of people were looking at this, oh, we're in the belly of the fish, we're in the belly of the fish, talking about the pandemic. And I said, actually, the pandemic is more parallel to the bottom of the ocean than it is to the belly of the fish. The belly of the fish, quarantine is more like the belly of the fish. Quarantine is a time to sit back, time to reflect, time to sit in some silence, time to sit away from all of the distractions that's keeping us from the work and the will of God in our life. So I think this quarantine is very equal to the belly of the fish.
Quarantine is the path to getting on dry land.
That's right. There's the moment to distance yourself from people and other distractions that's keeping you away from what God has called you to do in the first place.
Darnell, I am so grateful for that scripture and for that underpinning of understanding how even when things are bad, they could be worse, right? Yes. And that we got to look and see that maybe the situation that we're in now is the vehicle to getting our feet on dry ground.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I love it. Thank you so much.
I love this. I always love studying with you, right?
It's a blessing. It's a blessing.
So friends and neighbors on the internet, if you want to continue the conversation that Reverend Darnell has started with us about what is your path to getting on the dry land, how is it that the fish, the big fish of Jonah, is actually a vehicle towards a better life? We'd like to continue that conversation. Please sign up for one of those small group conversations below. Reverend Darnell, thank you for teaching me some Torah.
God bless you. Thank you.
God bless you.
Great. So in a regular Sofa Spirituality session, the next thing we would do after we watch the video is encounter some conversational questions. And it goes kind of like this. One way that we could begin our conversation would be to start here. Have you experienced the pandemic as the bottom of the ocean or as the belly of the fish? And why? But that's not the only place where we could start. We could also start in one of these places. How does the experience of trauma affect the ways that we read our sacred texts? Or what does your faith teach about finding meaning in difficult experiences? Have these teachings actually helped you when times are hard? Or the book of Jonah is read during Yom Kippur. How does our use of particular texts at particular holidays or seasons affect our interpretation of those events or of those texts? So those are a few places where our conversation together could begin. But we could also start somewhere else. Where would you like to start?
So what Liddy just did was to open up the door for all of us. Anyone have a reflection on what Darnell was teaching us and how that is a window or a mirror?
As a camp director, I often have to play icebreakers, and doing this virtually has been difficult. So the one I've stumbled across that I like a lot is, what's your silver lining been? And the thing is, through this crazy pandemic, if you've taken the time to stop and look at it, there have been a lot of cool things that happened that wouldn't have otherwise happened. So what's your silver lining? And it's always been a great way to jump into any conversation I found.
Brad, I'm curious, have most
sorry,
people
my video's not on.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry
Brad,
about that.
So I'm curious, Brad, like, have most people been able to identify silver linings readily?
Quickly, right? And I always start just to make sure that people are getting where I'm going, and everybody's got one. And most people don't have to think about it long because they've already thought about it at some point. They just haven't maybe verbalized it.
We like, you know how sometimes we're on a Zoom call, like there's this ping pong between people and then, the leaders. We like not to play ping pong. So I see Lori, you're right in there. Don't wait for us to say something. Anyone that wants to pop in, we're on that couch. and we're talking, we got a Chablis in our hands.
Yeah, I've recently heard that the best way to not ping pong is to surreptitiously drink some water in the pause as the leader. Thought that was a great tip. What you just said reminded me of the beautiful Dainu video from, I think, Adat Shalom in Michigan last year, talking about what is enough, even in these circumstances. If you haven't seen that video, it's really inspiring. And the other piece, just back to the, what does this bring up? Like, there's an isolation, different isolation inside the belly, where there's darkness, there's a claustrophobia, there's a lack of awareness of what's beyond, which maybe is different from the bottom of the ocean. And we are on some level a selfish species, and so maybe we lift up like our own darkness and limits, rather than sort of like seeing that common element. There's a tension there of sort of acknowledging our own scaredness, I think, and also sort of finding the realities that we share.
When I was doing Christian education at a church, I built a 40-foot inflatable plastic whale with my Sunday school students, and that you could crawl inside. It's basically, you make a tube out of black plastic sheeting. Super fun. And there is something, like, all of us were scared to crawl into that space. It was dark in there. It was a little closed in. And I think there's something really insightful in the way that you framed that for us, Lori.
I love the idea of quarantine in the belly of the fish. And I love the opportunity to think about how we can and still can to think about reflection and solitude and finding that space. I apologize, I'm across from a fire department. That's not a good sound, therefore. But as an early childhood educator as well, we work very hard in classrooms to have cozy nooks, quiet nooks, darker nooks, places where children can go when they're having a hard time, instead of screaming and yelling and pulling them apart. It's sort of like being in the belly of the fish. And the other thing that occurs to me is that if indeed the bottom of the ocean is sort of a metaphor for the pandemic itself, there are things living at the bottom of the ocean. It is not completely devoid of that. And so even during the midst of this tragedy and all of the death and destruction that we've all known, there is still life there and light to be looking for, not to make easily of the terrible stuff, but that there is always something living in a place where you're not quite sure anybody is at any point. So I loved watching that.
Super. I think Renee wanted to get in.
Hi, this is a great talk. I love these questions. I was just thinking about when the pandemic hit and how for the first little bit, I think I felt a lot of, I felt like I was at the bottom of the ocean. Like, it was just, everything was so hard. All the connections dropped. I couldn't see anybody in person. We laid off all of our employees except for a few. And then it just took a little time, but I guess I just started paying attention to what was going on around me. And I realized that I still had a job. Like, I still have I never got sick during the pandemic. Like, I still had all of the people around me. It was just a matter of connecting with them in a different way. And so it just took a little bit of time, and even seeing people like friends of mine that had lost their jobs and realizing there were ways I could help them, and that I wasn't at the bottom of the ocean. It just looked a little different. Maybe it looked a little darker. And then I can't remember exactly how the other questions were worded, but that idea of like those darker times in my life were the times where I really discovered something about myself that I didn't know about or I needed to change, and it helped me in my work relationships or my personal relationships. And for that, I'm really not as scared of those dark times anymore. I know that they are the things that propel me and help me feel more connected to spirit and other people. So so anyway, that's a good talk. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what my curiosity was with one of those questions on the second slide too, was, you know, that how much of the ways that that people are able to reframe their traumatic experiences in positive ways, how much of those are skills that are taught by our faith traditions, and how do we absorb the wisdom of faith traditions when it comes to experiencing trauma in ways that actually help us in our lives when we have those negative experiences. Lisa.
So a year ago, I had COVID. I was one of the first, ones, whoopee, to have it. And for me, it was traumatic, even though I wasn't hospitalized. And especially probably last year when we were inundated in the news with so much so quickly, and I should never watch the news, just like never Google anything. And I honestly thought, even though I was home, that's it, I'm dying, it's over. And as I laid there, and I called my older daughter who's married, and I said, I think I used a little bit of Jewish humor as opposed to my faith, although I did speak with my rabbi at the time. And I said, here's the will, don't fight over the jewels with your sister. And, you know, but in time, I got better. And, you know, obviously I went back to work in June 8th, and I'm the early childhood director here at the JCC in Lehigh Valley. And I've never been afraid to go back. I just got my second vaccine yesterday. It was the second best day of my life. But that being said, it really grounded me, you know, in terms of faith. I am a conservative Jew, and so I use my faith on a daily basis. At that point, I thought I'd lost a little of it, but I realized it was always there. And every day that I got a little better, my mental health improved as well. So it affected me. You know, I leaned on my spirituality then, but I also leaned on that aspect of Judaism where there's a little bit of humor in everything.
I'm really curious about the dichotomy between how Liddy created a crawl-in fish, almost like a camp experience, and how Darnell looked at this as a real adult way of engaging. I think all of us at some point along the way have some familiarity with Jonah and the fish, that whole story. What does this do? Like, how does that conversation that Darnell brought us into, how does that change who we are in relationship to that story?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to just go ahead and jump in since we never rehearse our conversation. So like, this is genuine response. Like for me, I think that hearing that perspective from Darnell helps me take what can be a really, for adults, a problematically concrete story. Like, we don't actually believe that giant fish swallow people and they come back 3 days later, and helps us engage in that story metaphorically in a way that that I think provides avenues towards engagement in scripture that that can sometimes be a challenging leap to make with some of these you know, more fanciful stories. And you know, I don't know what kind of how the book of Jonah necessarily gets read in Jewish educational spaces, but I know for me in seminary, the book of Jonah was presented to us as a kind of novella, right? That this was you know, intended to be a story that people could find meaning in beyond its sort of literal implications.
I was just thinking, as Darnell said, that being in the belly of the fish is better than being on the floor of the ocean. Sometimes it takes somebody else to point that out to you. So when you are in the rough spot is when you do need community, because being in the belly of the fish kind of stinks, both literally and figuratively. And so until somebody points out the floor of the ocean would be a lot worse, you're not going to fully see your circumstances.
And I got to tell you, Darnell and his work in the Center for Victims is all about taking people who have experienced trauma, and in particular, Black folks, right, because of his specialization in who experience trauma, and help them figure out, how can I grow past the trauma? How can I grow through the trauma? The phrase is not a post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder, it's post-traumatic stress growth. right? And how do we get there? And he's masterful at that.
Right, it just goes to prove that it's always comes back to community. And I think that we often, even though we're doing so many community-wide programs at JCCs, that's the one letter we don't focus on a lot. That we spend more on the J and the second C than the middle C.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you put it that way, Brad, because I'm a big proponent of whenever I say I work at the JCC, I do JCC, right? Because I think that there's something about the middle name, right? That's really important. I'm curious as we move from this dialogue into, okay, so how can I use this at my JCC? How did it feel to be at a JCCA conference and to have a Black pastor guide us in this conversation and a UCC minister guide us in this conversation? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Lydia won't take any offense. Don't worry about it.
Felt natural.
Yeah, Lisa.
I mean, I'll just share one thing that happened last year because we're at JCC. I have an older toddler room with 2 teachers that are not Jewish, and we have a lot of children here that are also not Jewish. And one of the teachers comes into my office and she's like, "Miss Lisa, we're going around singing songs, and Kenya wants us to sing 'What a Friend We Have in Jesus.'" I'm like, "Sing it." And she's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yes. Jesus was Jewish, sing it." I don't know what else to say. I mean, so she sang it, but that's my point. I think it's wonderful. Anytime I learn something about somebody else, it's a wonderful experience.
That's great. So let's do this. If you can now turn back to the chat, and if you can just record one expression of where you are in this conversation, not about its application to JCCs, but really about the content of what Darnell put on the table for us. Whether it's a window or a mirror, a phrase, a sentence, something that you now have been gifted as a result of what he shared or what others have shared, that just sticks with you in some way.
Yeah. We often phrase this as one thing you'll take with you into the rest of your day, right? So you're not pledging to like remember this sentiment always and forever, but just like what's one thing from the conversation we just had that you want to remember at least for a while?
So look at how deep that chat is, right? And that's just a wonderful. Well, we got someone. What do you make of that background noise?
Is that yours? Okay.
I don't think it was me. Good.
Oh.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
So I was saying, just look at how deep these comments are, and we're really grateful that you engaged in it, even in this little bit artificial way of doing it at a conference. So now we want to present to you what's possible. Like, why did we want to share this? Aside from having a good conversation, what can this do for my JCC? Well, we think that there are professional development applications. Sofa Spirituality can help introduce non-Jewish staff to Jewish holidays and culture. What we just did with Darnell was a really deep dive into something spiritual, but imagine if we did that with a rabbi and a shofar. By the way, we have that video. Imagine if we did that with a rabbi and a Passover Haggadah, or a piece of matzah, or whatever it might be. All of those are ways to bring Jewish life to members of your staff who perhaps are not as well familiar with it. By the way, it's not just non-Jews. We know that we have Jewish staff at our JCCs who need a refresher, or not even need a refresher. They've never lived in that world of the holidays. And so it's an opportunity to bring them in. And I'll also reflect on what Lisa shared from Allentown. that our staffs are so incredibly diverse. And if we actually want to build community among our staff, it could be that you have a staff member who is spiritual in his or her own way and is worth putting on video to have a conversation about their spirituality. And then that would open up a whole dialogue of building community among staff around religion, around culture, around values, around holidays, etc., etc. In each one of these, we think that it's really important. For example, if we're talking about the first two options, that it's not just another Jew doing the interview with a Jewish person talking about a shofar. It's really important to have a non-Jew do that, because that's how we avoid the in-talk and the assumptions that are made. So like I said earlier, Lydia and I split up the interviews based on who we're interviewing in order to make sure that we have that sense of wonder and curiosity that almost comes, again, from early childhood. Right? Like, gee, I don't know anything about that. Tell me more about it. Help me understand. We also want you to understand that in this case, this is not about some experts coming in, swooping in and giving you something prefabbed. We would want to elevate your staff. Your staff would be the ones who are being interviewed. Your staff could be the ones also who are guiding dialogues, although we're happy to be there. And again, I want to reiterate that because of the funding that we have from the Russell Berry Foundation, this doesn't cost your JCC anything. We want to have impact. We want to have engagement. So that's one side of what we're thinking this could be for your JCC. The other side is the external side of it. For community events, think of how it is that your JCC can be at the center of a really interesting way of doing interfaith engagement. We can create a series for your JCC community. In that series, we wouldn't just pick the interviews that we have from national and Pittsburgh-based leaders. We would go into St. Louis, and you would tell us, who should we be talking to, right? And we would then bring their voices into it through the videos. We can guide the dialogues, and we can teach you how to do that. And we can help you decide on what are the preferred audiences for this. The teens, the parents of young children, the adults, the seniors. You can be in the midst of that thinking through. Rhonda.
Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you. So I have a question, something that's striking me. In the Jonah story is about a man who's running away from God, who finds God in the belly of the whale. And I didn't hear God mentioned by anybody, not in the video and not in any of the conversations. I heard community, but the Jonah story isn't about a man being helped by community. He's about a man meeting God and gaining strength from that. So I'm just wondering, in your programming in general, because it's not a particular faith, it's interfaith, do you try to stay away from
No, we go straight in. Oh my God, we go, it's a quirk of the way that Darnell presented it and a quirk of our conversation today. But trust me, right? We get into God stuff, right, on a regular basis. And it all depends on the subject from the interview and who's in the room. Yeah. And it goes deep.
Yeah, I would say too, I think for us, an important hallmark of the work we've done together is that interfaith is not about a sort of blurry least common denominator, or about finding some kind of loosey-goosey spiritual thing that everybody thinks is cool. Interfaith is about celebrating the particularities of the faith traditions in the room. And that means really leaning into the stuff that makes us fascinatingly different from one another, without having the conflict and challenge that is often kind of sparked by that, the pieces that make people afraid of getting into particularities. One of our interviews, that we showed publicly recently was an interview with the Roman Catholic Bishop of Pittsburgh, in which he talks about Christian conceptions of the Trinity and how he always felt a little challenged by, he felt like he had a really strong relationship with Jesus, but what does it mean to have a relationship with God the Father? And how does this all relate in a Christian conception of Trinitarianism? And it was really interesting to talk about the Trinity in a room full of Jews, former Catholics, people from the Baha'i tradition. What do we make of this weird conception? So yeah, it can be a little bit of everything.
Thank you.
Sure. The other option that we thought of, but again, these are not limiting, is that we could create, and to a certain extent, I'm looking over at Mark now, we can create a continental cohort of JCCs that join together, whether it's 2 or 3 or 160 of them, right? To say that this is a value added for JCC engagement, that if we really are town squares of our communities, if we're town squares that do not segregate, that do not discriminate, that know that, yeah, we are J, but we're also C, right? That 1/3 of all people that walk through JCCs on a regular basis pre-COVID are not Jewish, and JCCs, as Darnell has said, are the best Jewish community relation councils, right, across the land. Then we have an opportunity to do something bigger than just in any one community. And that's a part of the possibilities of what the virtual J can be, and how it is that each one of us could be a part of it. And again, we can highlight independent, we can highlight the work of individual JCCs and the people in those JCCs. And in each of these, it offers the opportunity for the JCC, the individual JCC, to be at the center of community in your community. Again, it's not about us saying, oh, we got this covered. You can pick one of the 100 videos that we already have. We're constantly looking to have more videos, constantly looking to have more conversations, because with each conversation, with each video, we learn something new. With each dialogue, we learn something new as well. Those are just the 2 big, broad parameters that we thought about: professional development and community events, and then the smaller ones within. But we're open. I mean, we want to have a conversation about what you think about it all.
Sure. And if you want to have a conversation about this, you can obviously catch us in the last 10 minutes of this presentation, or you can find us at these email addresses and at that website on the screen, sofaspirituality.org, to explore a little bit more about what's in our archive and what some of the future possibilities might be. Yeah.
We're open to you.
I have a question.
Yeah, Lori.
Do you have any sense of the analytics of whether people are sort of watching and consuming the videos on their own without engaging in the larger process? And if so or not, what does that say to you about sort of the work and sort of where we're at in bandwidth of engaging on a communal level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely people are watching who are not engaging in dialogues. We've actually had, I would say, more success in some ways with our structured partnerships for dialogue than we have with the public, y'all come Field of Dreams style dialogues. In some ways, I think that watching the videos on their own can be a satisfactory first step, right? If somebody's having that experience, I think people are able to gain something just from viewing those conversations. While we live in a season of digital meetings, we also live in a season where Zoom fatigue is real. And so we do hear from folks about, oh, I would have loved to have signed up for that, but it would have been my 8th Zoom call that day. And that's fair too. So I think the work for us is really underlining for people, this is hopefully a Zoom meeting that does not feel the same as your like executive committee check-in or your like meeting with your boss and your team at work. Like this can be a space that is full of hope and nourishment for folks. And I think that's how we've experienced it, even on a personal level. Being in these conversations has been a real sort of moment of some lightness and joy in our days.
Any reflections from folks about professional development, about community engagement?
Well, I'm happy to jump in just to say that I'm going to leave all the thank yous up to Sarah, but I feel like I have learned new opportunities in all the ways you described them and more, both Ron and Liddy, to just branch out, bring this. I loved what I heard, and I think that it's really important to think about how we can bring it to a larger audience, or smaller next, and then larger, and continuing. We have on this call, only because I know some of the people and others I see, such a diverse group of people, not only diverse places, but diverse responsibilities in their JCCs. We have people who are in every single department, not every single department, but many different kinds of departments. And if it appeals to people, this is something that does not appeal to, I'm not making any sense, so I apologize, but this is something that appeals to many different people who are in many different places, who have a common thread, which is seeking and lurking and yearning and wanting. And you get to scratch that itch with what you've prepared here. So I look forward to hearing from all of you on the screen. I'll put my email in here as well, because I can actually make things happen, about how you'd like to see this move forward, and whether you'd like to be a part of this moving forward, or you think your JCC and your people would like to be. So please be in touch about that, because I think it could be very valuable.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. We're really grateful that you spent the hour with us, and we're hopeful that it does spark the possibility of how JCCs can be in this space as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to be the timekeeper.
Yep.
Sorry, Reverend Liddy.
Please.
I have to be the timekeeper so that everybody can get off to their, have a quick break before they go into the virtual vendor halls or into their trusted advising. But I want to say a huge thank you to both of you and to everybody basically on the call. I want to remind us, because I just wrote this down, because you said what people need to do for the sofa spirituality. But I think this is what people need to do, full stop. Be kind, listen with curiosity, engage without judgment, speak with honesty, and share the floor. We need to do that everywhere, not just, I think you've given us an amazing and a wonderful blueprint. And I think those are important guidelines that we should have up on the side of our computers until we get back into the rooms, and those of us in rooms at all times. I like to think that this pandemic, the silver lining of it, has really taught us that there is a room for spirituality in our lives, and that while not all of us may consider ourselves spiritual people, it is something that we can learn by just stopping and talking and sharing and being, and not always doing. And I think you both have showed a beautiful example of that, and the importance of just dialogue and sharing and listening and talking with each other. And last of all, the sort of the celebrating the differences, and not seeing differences as the problem, but really as the solution and the beautiful. So thank you both so much for sharing and giving us such very practical ideas of what we can do with your, innovative idea, and being so generous with that. Thank you both. I have a couple of very quick announcements for everybody. The virtual vendor hall will be open again today, just after this session. Please, please, please go in and say a huge thank you to the people that have enabled the fact that this conference could be offered to everybody for free. You'll see product demos and have the opportunity to ask questions. Not everything is sports related. There are other non-sports vendors, so please do have a look and come visit us at one of them at least. If you have a trusted advising session, use the link that was sent to you. And finally, join us at 3 o'clock Eastern Time for the closing movement moment of ProCon 2021. I've been so proud to be part of this ProCon 2021 and to share my Zoom time with some of you more than once and some of you for the first time today. So thank you. And we will stop right now on the dot.